So one of the three fundamentals that I've identified in this section are based on Venn diagrams. And the obvious Venn diagram that you will have seen is the supplier logo. And whether it's crossed your mind where that logo has come from and why it looks that way, maybe it has, maybe it hasn't. But I just want to take a little bit of time to explain it to you, because these three fundamentals have been the building blocks, some which have been right with us since the start of working at Suppliant and creating Suppliant, and some which have come along more recently. And this is the oldest one. This is the one that we actually used to set the company up as a fundamental factor in successful client management. So it's that important. It's actually our logo. So the logo was based around a guy called John Adair, who was a business management expert in the 70s. And his principle was based on the three circles, which included task, team, and individual. And his thesis was that it had to be that these three areas were balanced so that you get the most effective output consistently in leadership and management of your team. So if we look at the first one on the screen, you can see the Venn diagram, and you can see that this very perfect, balanced example of how these three things would work together. And you can also see that there's an interaction between team and task, and there's an interaction between task and individual and team, which is understandable in terms of there's a relationship that's formed between each of those on a one-to-one. But as a shared element, which is this area in the center here, this is the area of results. And what we want to do is maximize the opportunity for results. Now, this being the perfect scenario of the three circles, we have to look at where it can go wrong to understand the principle of the theory. So if we look at this going wrong, and if you were to look at our logo and you saw these three circles looking like that, you'd think there's something pretty drastically up with the logo for a start, and it's not right. So when you look at this, what it's showing is that there's an inflated view of the task. And what that means is that it's unrealistic. The task is too big. The deadline is too soon. The client is being relentless with the expectations of us as a company. So we have to identify that, and we can visually identify it by showing it in this way. The problem with the inflation of one particular circle, and if you imagine it's kind of this one mass that is kind of the same mass inside all these circles, but it's growing and being distorted as it's being pushed around, is that the task is large, which means that it's causing stress on the team. And in this explanation, or this illustration I've done here, as you can see, there's a huge amount of pressure on the team, which will probably cause things such as infighting and massive discontent amongst the people having to work in those stressful situations caused by the task. And then as an individual as well, not as stressed as the team, but individually causing problems. If we look at the next example where you find that the individual is inflated, it could be an inflated ego, or maybe that person's turning up late to work, or maybe you're recognizing that one person, the way they talk doesn't sound like it's agreeable. It's not like we do things at Suppliant. Maybe they're telling a few little white lies and not being wholly accurate with the truth, and that individual is causing the team a lot of pressure. But not only is it causing the team pressure, but because the team's not getting on and the individual's not doing what they're supposed to be doing, the task isn't getting done. If we look at the last visual, you can see that here the team is the distorted, challenging area. And that could be where you're finding that the team is getting on great. Maybe the boss is away and everybody's turning in late, having a great time, and generally all getting on very, very well. But what that might mean is that with the individual that's becoming distorted, you've got outliers who don't feel part of that clique, part of that group, and they don't feel like they're engaged in it. And equally, again, the task is not getting done. So going back to the objective of this particular diagram, it is to have a balanced view of the task, the team, and the individual at all times to make sure that it's sustainable and enjoyable for everybody in the business, and also, first and foremost, is the task is getting done. Now, just quickly, if we go back to these examples where you've got these inflated lines, or these inflated circles, what do you do? What can you do in those situations? Well, quite simply, the first thing you need to do is stop. And you need to be able to use this diagram and this thesis to identify that something's not right. Sometimes you'll sit there and you'll say, I don't know, I'm feeling something, it doesn't feel quite right, but I don't really know if I should say anything or not. These cultural guiding principles of team, task, and individuals are for you to ask the question, is it right? Once you've identified it's not right and you've seen one of these inflated circles, what you've got to do is you've got to cut it back. You've got to cut it back and reapportion that into these other areas. So if you're finding that the team is running away, you need to stop and you need to get refocused on actually getting the task done. And that may mean that you need to then assert yourself upwards to your senior management, or you need to assert yourself to your team and peer group and actually say, I don't think this is quite right, what do you think? And you can deal with it at that level. So looking at that model, very, very simple concept, but use it and always have a think about it and use it as a trigger to start the process of managing yourself and the project more effectively.